All right. If you were on the front lines, what combat action did you witness?
We were not on the front lines.
Okay.
We arrived there after the war and moved on up into Okinawa and Iwo Jima. The Philippines were cleared of most of the Japanese except a few holdouts, and the infantry was taking care of that by getting rid of them. The worst experience we had at all was in flight training at Alexandria, Louisiana, where we saw two of our B-17s come together, crash, and go down in flames, and all 18 people were burned. And that night, the officers came into the barracks, took out the foot lockers of each one, put them in a duffel bag, carried them out, and told us that everybody in that crash died. And another time, another airplane was coming in for a landing and crashed on landing and killed all 8 people on board. Those were seen in the United States rather than overseas. After we arrived overseas and landed on Leyte, our bomber pulled off to the side of the runway. Another airplane was taking off at the same time and crashed right in front of us on top of it. And the pilot burned to death right before our very eyes. That was horrible to see for an 18-year-old boy.
Okay. What were your duties since you were not on the front lines?
My duties were actually as a gunner on the B-17, but it seems to my memory that at about the time they were getting ready to drop the atom bomb, that they took all of us who had educations, at least high school education, and 2 or 3 years of typing and secretarial type work, that they gathered us together and put us on this ship to be sent overseas. The ship took 30 days to leave San Francisco Bay and arrive in Manila. And during that time, we had 2 meals a day, one in the middle of the morning and one in the middle of the afternoon. And that was all we had to eat until we were going over there. But we never will forget, anybody that went over at that particular time won't forget.
Keep going.
Won't forget the sight of seeing the Golden Gate Bridge leave behind us, not knowing how long we'd be overseas or when we'd ever get to see the Golden Gate Bridge. And I'll tell you, by coming back underneath that when we came home.
Okay. Since you did not see combat, you already answered how you felt when witnessing casualties and destruction.
Very distressing.
Yes.
Very distressing for an 18-year-old kid. Never saw anybody die before.
What kinds of friendships and camaraderie did you form while serving, and with whom?
I had a wonderful camaraderie with serving. The same people that went to basic training and gunnery school and flight training in Alexandria were the same people I went overseas with. One in particular from New York, and he and I served together down on Leyte and back in Manila after we finished closing up the base on Leyte. Our purpose on going down there was to decommission an airstrip that they had. And at that airstrip, we had about 30 men there, 3 airplanes, and all the people were enlisted people except a few pilots. We had radio contact with Manila by way of 4 generators, which were out in the jungle from the tent area. It was your duty to go out and make sure those generators kept going 24 hours a day, as well as working the supply and other duties around the base. You built your own tent, you lived in your own tent, you took a shower in the public shower area. The food was really not too bad, but every time a ship would come in from Australia, if it got in from Australia, we had pretty good food, mostly chicken and turkeys and spam.
How did you stay in touch with family and friends back home?
By letters, and if the letters ever got through, lots of times it wouldn't. It'd be months before you ever heard from home, and months before home ever heard from you. And even then, they weren't allowed. You weren't allowed to tell them exactly where you were, what outfit you were with.
What did you do for recreation or when you were off duty?
Well, we had volleyball court right there in our little area where we'd play volleyball and sit around and tell stories and various things. And we were just about maybe 200 yards into the jungle from the beach, the same beach that MacArthur came in on, called White Beach. But that was pretty well littered with crashed airplanes and other debris from when they made the initial invasion of Leyte. There were still a lot of parts out there, but that's where we would go swimming and so forth.
Okay. This would be in reference to war's end and coming home. Where were you when the war ended?
When the war ended, I was probably on my way to Manila. They dropped the bomb, and the big bomb which ended everything, and that's when the Japanese gave up and so forth. But that was the great day in America.
How did you return home?
I returned home by the same type of ship that we went over on. It took us 30 days to go over on what they called a Liberty ship. These were ships that were at one time used to carry freight, and they were outfitted with about 6 bunks high down in the hold. You had to climb from one bunk to the other to get up to your bunk if you were on a top bunk. You held your helmet over the side so people could throw up when they got seasick, and that was a pretty bad sight. But it took 30 days on board that ship to go over and 30 days to come back. Going over, we went over between Hawaii and Midway. Coming back, we came up along the Pacific Rim, along by Japan, and along through Alaska, and came down to San Francisco that way. 30 days.
How were you received by your family and community?
We were received greatly. As a matter of fact, that was the difference between World War II, the Korean War, the Vietnam War, and other wars. America had won the biggest and most terrible war that had ever existed at that time. And unless you lived in America at that time, you didn't realize what a wonderful nation it was to live in. It had so much spirit de corps and pride in a nation that had literally won the war in Europe and won the war in Japan. And even before we went into the war in 1941, America was supplying Russia with tanks and ammunition and anything but manpower, in the same way with England. And that was before Japan struck Pearl Harbor. When they struck Pearl Harbor, they took out about half of our Navy. But America rallied around the troops, and everybody, women, men, boys, and girls, all wanted to serve their country, because the country at that time was a very patriotic nation compared with the country we live in today.
How did you readjust to civilian life?
I had no problem readjusting at all. I came out of the service in June. I went to work for the railroad digging ditches over in Illinois while I was considering what college I would go to. I had 4 years of college coming to me from the GI Bill, and I wanted to go to school somewhere since I had no formal training at all at that time, but high school education and the ability to take down a 50 caliber machine gun and put it back together again.
Have you remained in contact with or reunited with fellow veterans? If so, who?
No, I have not remained in contact with any. I got a call from a fellow gunner about 5 or 6 years ago over in Arkansas, and I don't even remember seeing him or remembering his name, but he called me on the telephone one night, and we had a nice chat. He served with me in Alexandria, but I don't remember his name.
Are you a member of any veterans organizations?
No, I'm not a member of any veterans organizations. I was always too busy working to take the time to do that.
What have you done since separating from the military?
Well, I went to college for a few years and learned to be an embalmer and funeral director. Then I learned to be a commercial pilot. I served as a funeral director for many years, for 20 years, and about 20 years as a pilot, and also owned 2 different businesses. I wound up my last 20 years of my life managing a business in Memphis, Tennessee. Now retired.
How did your wartime experiences affect your life?
They affected my life entirely. I learned discipline. I learned how to say yes and no, sir. I learned all the courtesies one would learn. I learned how to respect authority, most of the respect authority. And I learned cleanliness. The military was some of the cleanest places you'll ever be. Your floors were scrubbed at night every once a week with a big brush and lye soap. The floors were as clean as the plates you eat off of. And I learned most of all to get along with other people and meet people. And no matter how you didn't know them at all, but you time needs to be sleeping in a bunk over you. And that's the way I really learned how to meet people. It was a good experience. It was not a bad experience for me, except the horrible things that I saw.
What are some life lessons you learned from military service?
I think the biggest life lesson would be discipline and how to take an order from somebody and how to respect authority. When you respect authority, you will do as they say and don't ask any questions.
How has your military service impacted your feelings about war and the military in general? How has your military service impacted your feelings about war and the military in general?
Wars are meant to be won, fought and won, people killed and maimed. They were not to be meant to be settled over a political table. It all began after World War II, when MacArthur wanted to take over the Korean Peninsula, and Truman stepped in and said no, and he fired MacArthur for it. That was the day that politics entered into the military service in a big way. The Korean War was not won, it was settled. The Vietnam War was not won, it was settled. Politicians took over the military at that time instead of the military doing what they had to do in order to win a war. That's why we won World War II, and we settled all the rest of the wars. That's how it impacted my opinion of America and the nation we live in today. It's run by politicians.
What message would you like to leave for future generations who will view or hear this interview?
I would like to leave with the impression of the fact that World War II was fought because we were attacked. We didn't attack anyone before we were declared war. Japan attacked us first, and Germany also attacked our ships that were taking Lend-Lease materials to Russia as well as to England. But like I say, wars were meant to be fought, and people were meant to be killed, and nations were meant to be taken over. Otherwise, there'd be no nation, no need for war.
Is there anything you feel like we haven't discussed or should be added to the interview? If so, what?
I think we've covered this interview very well. I don't think there's anything else to be added. I've told you everything I know about it, and that's about all I can tell you right now.
Thank you for taking the time, Daddy. This was a service for future generations.
You're welcome.